So you're standing in the plumbing aisle, staring at a wall of push-to-connect fittings, and you're seeing SharkBite, you're seeing other brands, and you're wondering, is there actually a difference here? Or is this all the same thing with different packaging? That's exactly what we're going to break down today. I'm going to walk you through what push-to-connect really means, how SharkBite compares to the other brands on the market, what's actually going on inside these fittings, and where the real differences show up when it comes to your project. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a bonus tip on how to save some serious cash on push-to-connect fittings without sacrificing quality. Let's get into it. Push-to-connect fittings completely change the game for DIYers and remodel contractors alike. No soldering, no glue, no fumes, no open flame near your framing. You literally push the fitting onto the pipe and you've got a watertight connection. It's one of the most accessible plumbing technologies out there, and understanding the differences between brands is going to save you money and help you pick the right fitting for the right job. So let's start with the basics of how this whole category works. All right, before we compare any brands, you need to understand what push-to-connect actually is, because a lot of people use SharkBite and push-to-connect interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. Push-to-connect is the technology. It's a category of fitting. SharkBite is just one brand that makes push-to-connect fittings, kind of like how people say Band-Aid when they mean adhesive bandage, or Kleenex when they mean tissue. SharkBite just happened to be one of the first big names in the residential market, so their name stuck. The basic idea behind all push-to-connect fittings is the same across every brand. Oh, you've got a brass or plastic body. Inside that body, you've got a set of stainless steel teeth, sometimes called a grab ring, that bite down onto the pipe when you push it in. Those teeth allow the pipe to slide in, but they grip it so it can't pull back out. Then behind those teeth, you've got an O-ring, typically made from EPDM rubber, and that's what actually creates the watertight seal between the outside of the pipe and the inside of the fitting. That's it. Teeth grab the pipe, rubber seals the water. Every push-to-connect brand on the market uses some version of this same basic mechanism. The differences come down to the materials they use, how they engineer those internal components, what pipe types they're rated for, and of course the price point. Now let's talk about SharkBite specifically, because they're the 800-pound gorilla in this space, and there's a reason for that. SharkBite has been around in the U.S. market for roughly 15 to 20 years now, and they've built a reputation on two things: availability and ease of use. You can walk into just about any Home Depot, Lowe's, or hardware store in the country and find SharkBite fittings on the shelf. That alone is a huge deal, because when you've got a busted pipe on a Saturday afternoon, you need something you can actually get your hands on. SharkBite fittings are made with a dezincification-resistant brass body, which is a fancy way of saying the brass is formulated so it doesn't break down over time from contact with water. Inside, you've got that stainless steel grab ring and an EPDM O-ring. One of the things SharkBite does really well is their fittings are rated to work on copper, CPVC, CPVC, and PEX, PEX, rhymes with flex. That cross-compatibility is a big selling point, especially if you're working on an older home where you might be transitioning from one pipe material to another. SharkBite also makes a removal tool, which is a little plastic collar that you slide over the fitting to release those teeth so you can pull the fitting back off. That's handy for temporary caps during a remodel. I've used this on job sites where we're demoing a kitchen. We cap the supply lines with SharkBite caps, and then a couple weeks later when the plumber shows up, they just pop those caps off and keep going. Really convenient for that kind of workflow. However, I want to be upfront about something. SharkBite fittings are not cheap. Depending on the size and type, you're looking at anywhere from $8 to $15 per fitting, and on a bigger project that adds up fast. A standard 3/4-inch SharkBite coupling is going to run you around $10 to $12. Compare that to a copper sweat coupling that might cost you $1.50, and you can see why some guys in the trade push back on using these for every single connection. Now here's where it gets interesting, because SharkBite is not the only game in town, and honestly, some of the other brands deserve a lot more attention than they get. First up is Tektite by Apollo. Tektite fittings look almost identical to SharkBite, and functionally, they work the same way. Push-on, teeth-grab, O-ring seals. The brass body, the stainless steel grab ring, the EPDM gasket, it's all there. Tektite fittings are also rated for copper, CPVC, and PEX. Where Tektite tends to win is on price. You can often find Tektite fittings running a couple of bucks cheaper per fitting than SharkBite. And when you're buying 20 or 30 fittings for a water heater swap, that savings adds up quick. Next, you've got GatorBite. GatorBite fittings tend to be a little bit beefier in their construction, and some plumbers I know actually prefer the feel of them. They also work on copper, PEX, and CPVC. Price-wise, they tend to land right between SharkBite and Tektite. Then there's Blue Hawk, which is Lowe's house brand. If you shop at Lowe's, you've probably seen these on the shelf. They're more budget-friendly, but I've heard mixed reviews from guys in the field about long-term reliability. Personally, I haven't used enough of them to give you a definitive opinion, but just know they exist as a lower-cost option. And you've also got brands like Watts and ProBite that make push-to-connect fittings. Watts has been in the plumbing game for a long time, and their fittings are solid. ProBite flies under the radar, but gets good marks from contractors who've used them. The bottom line is that push-to-connect is the technology, and you've got at least 5 or 6 brands competing in this space. They all use the same basic mechanism. The differences are in the details, and that's what we're going to dig into next. Hey, if this is helping you sort things out, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. All right, let's keep going. So let's pop the hood on these fittings and talk about what's actually going on inside. Every push-to-connect fitting has 3 critical components: the body, the grab ring, and the O-ring. The body on most quality fittings is going to be dezincification-resistant brass, or DZR brass. This matters because standard brass contains zinc, and over time water can leach that zinc out, weakening the brass. DZR brass resists that process. SharkBite, Tektite, and most reputable brands use DZR brass. If you pick up a fitting and the packaging doesn't mention DZR, I'd be cautious. That's one area where cheaper brands sometimes cut corners. The grab ring is the teeth that hold the pipe. On SharkBite and Tektite, these are stainless steel teeth arranged in a ring. The quality of these teeth matters a lot. If they're too soft, they won't hold under pressure. If they're too aggressive, they can score the pipe and create a path for a leak. I've done pull tests on both SharkBite and Tektite, and they hold impressively well. I've seen fittings where the pipe itself failed before the fitting let go, which tells you something about the grip strength. Now the O-ring is the piece I pay the most attention to. Every push-to-connect fitting I've seen uses an EPDM rubber O-ring. EPDM is a synthetic rubber that's resistant to heat, water, and mild chemicals. Here's my concern though, and this applies to every brand, not just SharkBite. Rubber is rubber. Over time, especially with chlorinated water running through your system day after day, that O-ring is going to degrade. And keep in mind, here in the U.S., we use chlorine to disinfect our water supply, which is great for killing bacteria, but not so great for rubber over the long haul. That small amount of chlorine flowing past the O-ring year after year can slowly break it down. How fast depends on your water chemistry, your water temperature, and the quality of the rubber compound the manufacturer is using. SharkBite says their fittings are rated for a 25-year warranty, which is solid. But these fittings haven't been widely used in the U.S. long enough for us to have 30 or 40 years of real-world data on how those O-rings hold up. That's not me saying they're going to fail. It's me saying we just don't know yet. And that's worth factoring into your decision about where you put them. One more thing about the internals. If you're working with PEX pipe, most push-to-connect fittings require a stiffener insert. This is a small sleeve that slides into the end of the PEX pipe to keep the pipe wall rigid enough to press firmly against the O-ring. If you skip the stiffener on PEX, you're asking for a leak. SharkBite fittings come with the stiffener built in. Some other brands require you to insert it separately. Either way, just make sure it's there. When it comes to practical differences at the store, pipe compatibility is the first thing to check. SharkBite and Tektite both work on copper, CPVC, and PEX, which covers the vast majority of residential plumbing. That three-way compatibility is huge if you're working on a house that has a mix of pipe materials, which is extremely common in homes built between the 1970s and 2000s. You might find copper supply lines, CPVC runs to bathrooms, and maybe marteau-T, some PEX that was added during a later renovation. Being able to use one brand of fitting on all three pipe types without worrying about compatibility is a real time saver. Not every brand offers that same cross-compatibility, though, so always read the packaging. Some budget fittings are only rated for copper and PEX, but not CPVC, and if you use them on the wrong pipe type, you're setting yourself up for a failure down the road. Sizing is another thing. Most brands offer 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. SharkBite has the widest selection of fitting types, though. Couplings, elbows, T's, caps, valves, transition fittings, you name it. Some smaller brands have a more limited lineup, so if you need a specific configuration, like a reducing T, SharkBite is more likely to have it on the shelf. Price is where it gets real. On a single fitting, the difference might only be $2 or $3. But let's say you need 15 fittings for a bathroom. At $10 to $12, each for SharkBite, that's $150 to $180. Switch to Tektite at $8 to $10 each, and you're at $120 to $150. That's $30 to $50 back in your pocket for functionally the same connection. All right, regardless of which brand you go with, let me walk you through proper installation because doing it right is everything. First, cut your pipe clean and square. For copper, use a tube cutter, not a hacksaw. For PEX, use PEX cutting shears. For CPVC, a ratcheting pipe cutter works great. After you cut, deburr the pipe every single time. Take a piece of emery cloth or a dedicated deburring tool and clean up both the inside and outside edge of that cut. Any burr or rough spot can nick the O-ring as the pipe slides in, and a damaged O-ring means a leak. I cannot stress this enough. I've seen guys skip this step because they're in a hurry, and then wonder why they've got a drip 2 weeks later. 30 seconds of deburring can save you hours of troubleshooting. Second, mark your insertion depth. For a 1/2 inch fitting, you're typically looking at about 1 inch of insertion depth. For 3/4 inch, about 1 1/8 inches. Mark that distance on your pipe. When you push the fitting on, that mark should disappear right to the edge of the fitting. If you can still see it, the pipe isn't fully seated. This is the most common installation mistake I see. Third, push the fitting on with firm, steady pressure. Give it a tug to confirm the teeth have grabbed. The pipe should not pull out. Now let's talk about when to use these and when to think twice. Push-to-connect fittings are perfect for accessible locations. Exposed pipes in a basement, crawl space, under a sink, or on a water heater. They're also fantastic for emergency repairs. I keep a handful of caps and couplings in my truck at all times for exactly this reason. One of my guys actually replaced a buddy's water heater last month using all push-to-connect fittings. Took him about 2 hours start to finish, and the whole thing went smooth. For a water heater with a typical 15-year lifespan, push-to-connect fittings are a perfect match because the fitting and the appliance are going to age out around the same time. One thing I do want to mention about reuse. These fittings have a lubricant inside that helps the O-ring seal against the pipe. If you're pulling fittings off and reusing them, which is tempting for remodel contractors, I'd say you can probably get away with reusing them 2 or 3 times before that lubricant is gone. After that, you're pushing your luck. And my guess is that lubricant is also helping to protect the O-ring itself, so once it's depleted, you're losing some of that long-term sealing performance. Where I'd think twice is burying these inside a finished wall. And I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, but here's my reasoning. These fittings rely on a rubber O-ring, and rubber degrades over time. If that O-ring gives out in 20 or 30 years and the fitting is buried behind drywall and tile, you've got a serious water damage situation before you even know there's a problem. You could be looking at mold, rotted framing, the whole 9 yards, all because a fitting you can't see started weeping. For connections inside walls, I still prefer soldered copper or properly crimped PEX. It's more work up front, but the long-term peace of mind is worth it. Also, push-to-connect fittings are not UV stable, so don't use them on any outdoor exposed runs. And they're not rated for direct ground contact without some kind of protective sleeve. Let's go over some common issues and how to handle them. First, a slow drip right after installation. 9 times out of 10, the pipe wasn't fully inserted. Pop the fitting off, check your depth mark, re-deburr the pipe, and push it back on, making sure it seats all the way. Second, the fitting won't push onto the pipe. This usually means there's a burr or the pipe is slightly out of round. Clean up the end with emery cloth and try again. Third, a leak that develops weeks later. This could be a damaged O-ring from a burr you missed. Remove the fitting, inspect the O-ring, and replace it if you see nicks or cuts. Fourth, the fitting spins on the pipe. The teeth aren't gripping, usually because of corrosion or old flux residue on the pipe surface. Clean it with emery cloth until you see bright metal and use a new fitting. Fifth, you hear water hissing but don't see a drip. The pipe is almost fully seated, but not quite. Same fix as number 1, remove, verify depth, reinstall. Follow the proper cut, deburr, mark and push process every time, and you'll avoid most of these headaches. All right, here's the bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. If you've got a bigger project where you need a lot of push-to-connect fittings, don't buy them individually off the shelf. Most brands, including SharkBite and Tektite, sell contractor packs or bulk packs online. You can find packs of 10 or 25 fittings at a significant discount per fitting. I'm talking savings of 20 to 30%. For example, a 25 pack of 1/2 inch SharkBite couplings online might run you around $6 to $7 per fitting versus $10 to $11 each individually. On a 25 pack, that's saving you roughly $100. Same fittings, same quality, just smarter buying. Also, keep an eye out for Tektite multi-packs because their per unit cost in bulk is even lower. If you're doing a water heater replacement or replumbing a bathroom, buying in bulk is a no-brainer. Just make sure you're getting the right sizes and fitting types before you order, because returns on bulk packs can sometimes be a hassle. I usually sit down with a notepad before a project, count out every connection I'm going to need, add 2 or 3 extra just in case, and then place one order. Saves me money and saves me trips to the store. That's the full breakdown on SharkBite versus push-to-connect fittings. They're not the same thing, and now you know exactly why and how to pick the right one for your project. If this helped you out, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Got questions or want to share your own experience with these fittings? Drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching.